Discuss this in greater detail. Thank you.
Honourable Marianne Street.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It gives me great pleasure to rise and support this bill. Anything that curtails or curbs the consumption of tobacco in our society has to be a good thing. And we've heard already many of the statistics around tobacco and tobacco consumption. We know that about 5,000 deaths each year in New Zealand are attributable to either direct smoking or to second-hand smoke. So that is the environment around a smoker as well as their own consumption of tobacco. 5,000 deaths, Mr. Speaker. That's a lot of New Zealanders. In fact, if we have a look at the regulatory impact statement attached to the legislation, we notice that Treasury, in its inimitable style, tries to quantify the impact of tobacco and the harm. And it tries to quantify the social costs of smoking. So it says that the social costs of smoking have been estimated to be something in the order of 62,800 life years lost to tobacco-related premature deaths and 19,000 quality-adjusted life years lost to tobacco-related illness. Now, quality-adjusted life years is a term that's used in the health sector for sure. It doesn't mean a lot outside of that, but basically what Treasury says in its own way is that people could have lived longer and they could have lived longer better if they had not been subjected to tobacco consumption or had consumed tobacco themselves. Mr. Speaker, it gives me particular pleasure to speak to this bill as Labour's health spokesperson. This hasn't come up as a health measure. This bill has not been introduced by the Minister of Health. This bill has not come to the Health Select Committee. And so I am left with a question mark, Mr. Speaker, about the government's real motives. I would wish that there were a consensus. My colleague Ian Lees-Galloway a moment ago referred to a truce between Labour and National over controls on tobacco consumption and smoking. And I hope that this is better than a truce. I hope that this is actually an agreement on the negative health impact that smoking has on the lives of New Zealanders. But if the government were truly convinced that this is a good health measure, then surely the Minister of Health might have introduced it and it might have come to the Health Select Committee. But in fact, what I see is that we have an assessment that, and this is Treasury's assessment again, that this legislation will raise an additional $528 million over the next 4 years. $528 million over the next 4 years. Mr. Speaker, I would have more comfort that this was a health measure and not a tax grab if there was any reference to the $528 million over 4 years being put into smoking cessation. The Speaker who just resumed his seat a moment ago talked about not having too much trouble giving up smoking. Well, that is not true for most smokers. That is not true for most smokers. And in fact, people who are addicted to nicotine do require support. So let's be clear that if we are going to curtail the consumption of tobacco, we should have equal support measures put in place by the money raised from this measure. If this is going to raise $528 million over 4 years, Mr. Speaker, it would be a good idea if the government could see its way clear to redirecting that money into health initiatives and into supporting further quitline and nicotine substitutes and things that people need to reduce the harm and manage and finally reduce their addiction. This is not an easy substance to deal with, and certainly putting the price up is one way of making it less accessible to young people, and I support that. I support it as a health measure. I support it because the tobacco companies are known for their appeal, their advertising angle to young people. Would they be putting so much money into their current television advertising campaign, Agree to Disagree, I think it's called, around plain packaging of cigarettes, if they were not persuaded that advertising works? Mr. Speaker, if we raise the price, and Labor supports that, Labor supports it, as a health measure, not a tax grab, but as a health measure, if we do that, then let's make sure that we are helping people who will not be able to afford the one thing that they consider to be their stress relief, and that is a cigarette, to quit smoking, to give up that addiction. We are talking about an addiction here. This isn't simply, as the government would have us believe, a lifestyle choice. Mr. Speaker, we know, and one of my colleagues earlier said that we know what the four major killers of New Zealanders are: cardiovascular diseases, cancers, respiratory illnesses, diabetes. We know that these four killers take 80% of the health budget. We know that most of the symptoms are preventable. Why can we not now have an agreed position across the House on what the major health goals ought to be for New Zealanders and work jointly, as we are on this bill, to reduce them? But I have to say, Mr. Speaker, I'm not yet persuaded that the government has changed their mind over tobacco. If they have, and if subsequent speakers from the National Party can persuade me that they have changed their mind over tobacco, I will welcome that. But I just recall what Bill English said in 2000 when we in government were looking to increase excise on tobacco in 2000. Bill English said the reason we voted against this measure was that the government did not ever say that it would do it, and that is the measure it set, not us. The government did not say before the election that it would do it. That is the government's standard, not ours. It is a tax increase. It is a tax on the poorest people in New Zealand. It is an increase that is far too large, and that's why we voted against it, unquote. Mr. Speaker, that is the same man, Bill English, who went to the country in 2002 with a policy that said that they would repeal the Smoke-Free Environments Act. If there has been a change of heart, if there has truly been a change of heart in the National Party, I would like the next National Party Speaker to get up and say so. If we are agreed on the health goals here, then let's celebrate that and let's move forward. If this is simply a tax grab and the money is going to paper over the holes that the government's economic policy have left, then let them say that. I'm sure they won't, but let them be challenged to say that. We agree on this side of the House that this is a good measure for health reasons. Let it be for health reasons. Let us agree on it for those reasons, and let us pursue it and ring-fence some of the income from this increased excise to address the problem of smoking addiction. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Kevin Haig.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker.